1814, after years of conflict, the Sixth Coalition finally defeated Napoleon. The emperor was forced to surrender his throne and sent to exile on the distant island of Elba. A fragile peace settled over the continent as the Allied powers drew the new map of Europe. France returned to the Bourbons. The French Revolution was nullified. But that would change soon. On a cold February morning in 1815, a small ship slipped quietly from Elba's shores. On board was a man who refused to accept the verdict of history. Driven by ambition and the unwavering belief that his destiny was not yet finished, Napoleon returned to France. As he marched north, the soldiers sent to arrest their former emperor instead joined him, and within weeks, the man once cast out of Europe reclaimed the throne of his empire. All of Europe united once more in the Seventh Coalition. Napoleon had two options: fight another defensive campaign on French soil, or go on the offensive and take the fight to the coalition forces in a surprise attack. He chose the latter. His first target: Belgium. Napoleon's plan was simple: drive a wedge between Blucher's and Wellington's forces and take them on one by one. As long as the two Allied armies were separated, he had the advantage in manpower. If they were together, he would be outnumbered 2-1. Napoleon and his army crossed the Sambre River near Charleroi and drove a Prussian outpost back, securing Napoleon's sought-after central position. Marshal Ney, commanding the left wing, was tasked with marching on Brussels via the Quatre Bras junction. Wellington tried to stop the advance in a bloody battle, but to no effect, and retreated. Ney, however, did not immediately chase down the Allied army, which allowed it to escape towards Waterloo. At the same time, Napoleon was able to win a costly victory against Blucher, but also did not pursue the Prussian army right away. After waiting for too long, he detached 30,000 troops under the command of Grouchy to drive Blucher in front of him. Napoleon, with his reserves, made a late start on June 17th and joined Ney to follow the retreating army to Waterloo. Napoleon's French army, numbering approximately 69,000 soldiers, was an experienced force consisting of 48,000 infantry, 14,000 cavalry, and 7,000 artillery, with an arsenal of 246 guns. Wellington's multinational army totaled approximately 67,000 men, 50,000 infantry, 11,000 cavalry and 6,000 artillerymen equipped with 150 guns. However, only 24,000 were British troops. The rest were a collection of German, Belgian and Dutch troops. Wellington had visited this field a year before. As a result, his chosen position was easily defendable. It featured a long ridge running east to west. Wellington concealed the bulk of his infantry and cavalry behind the crest of the ridge. Crucially, 3 positions in front of the ridge could be fortified. To the far right was Hougoumont, a fortified chateau with a garden and orchard. On the far left was the hamlet of Papelotte, controlling the road to Vavreux. On the western side of the main road, in front of the rest of Wellington's line, was La Haye-Sainte, a farmhouse and orchard garrisoned with 400 light infantry. To the right rear of the French position was the village of Plancenoit. The battle kicked off with a diversionary attack by Jerome's division on Hougoumont. But after a while, more and more troops trickled into the fight. What started as a distraction became a long slugging match between the British and the French. French troops entered the courtyard, but were trapped and eliminated by the British. Fighting persisted throughout the afternoon, with French light infantry encircling Hougoumont and launching coordinated attacks on the troops behind it. Around noon, Napoleon initiated a grand artillery bombardment with around 80 guns targeting Wellington's position. However, the bombardment was not as effective as Napoleon thought due to the ridge protecting the soldiers behind it. Sometimes, Wellington ordered his soldiers to lay flat on the ground. Most of the time, the cannonballs smashed into the dirt of the ridge, but after a while, some French gun crew found their target and inflicted massive amounts of casualties. Around 1:15 p.m., Napoleon launched his first major infantry attack, with 4 large divisions under Geyl advancing in columns. They aimed to engage Wellington's left wing. The British and Allied forces defending this position included Dutch, Belgian, and British units, many of which were still recovering from earlier engagements. The French advance initially targeted the walled farmhouse compound of La Haye-Sainte, which was defended by the King's German Legion. Despite determined French efforts, the Germans held their ground, even without receiving any support. As French forces continued to advance, they stumbled upon the British 9th Brigade under Kempt. Leading to a partial collapse of the British line. The British heavy cavalry, among whom the Household Brigade and the Union Brigade, was then ordered into action to support the battered infantry. They charged downhill, mowing down any Frenchmen they could lay their hands on. The charge was successful. The cuirassiers, who were meant to guard Gey's left flank, were routed. However, the British cavalry, severely depleted in numbers and carried away by their success, pushed too far and were ultimately counterattacked by fresh lancers. Wellington knew he had to preserve his remaining troops and ordered the army to retreat 100 paces behind the ridge to protect them from enemy artillery. But Ney believed Wellington was pulling back. Seeing dust, movement, and gaps on the ridge, he was convinced that the Allies were on the verge of collapse and were about to retreat. So he unleashed the French cavalry. Thousands of cuirassiers and lancers surged forward, thundering across the muddy fields toward the Allied centre. But right when the French made it across the ridge, they were met by Wellington's infantry, formed in hollow squares, bristling walls of bayonets that no horse would dare charge head-on. Ney threw his cavalry at the squares. The French swept around them, firing pistols, slashing at the men inside, trying to find any weak point. But every assault was beaten back. The ground around the ridge became a maze of shattered horses, wounded men, and swirling smoke. But the squares held. The British heavy cavalry under Uxbridge was ordered to drive off the French cavalry, buying precious time for collapsing infantry squares to regroup. But the battle was still far from decided. By mid-afternoon, dark columns appeared on the eastern horizon. Prussian troops, Blücher's men, marching toward the French right. Their arrival threw Napoleon's timetable into chaos. Still, the French fought on. Ney, desperate to break Wellington before the Prussians fully joined the fight, launched a second massive infantry push toward the Allied centre. The attack combined infantry, skirmishers, and cavalry, but it was halted by brutal close-range musketry. Both sides suffered heavily, neither able to gain the upper hand. Then came a breakthrough. La Haye Sainte fell. The King's German Legion had held it for hours, but French infantry finally stormed the farmhouse. Instantly, French guns were pushed forward and began blasting the Allied squares at deadly range. Casualties mounted. Wellington's line bent. But then the Prussians struck. Geylo's fourth corps smashed into the French right, near Plancenoit, and soon after, Zieten's first corps reached Wellington's left. French morale began to crack under the pressure. With everything slipping away, Napoleon committed his final reserve, the legendary Imperial Guard. They steadily marched up the ridge and forced back the shattered Allied units in front of them. For a moment, the Guard seemed unstoppable. But on the crest, fresh British battalions fired several coordinated volleys into the ranks of the Guard. The Guard halted, wavered, and began to fall back. As Prussian forces pressed in on the flank and rear, the French line dissolved. The retreat of the Imperial Guard, something thought impossible, shattered what remained of French morale. The turning point had come. The battle was lost. The Grenadiers of the Old Guard formed a brave but doomed square, buying time for the rest of the army to retreat. For the French army, the defeat became a rout. The once proud columns broke apart, fleeing south in scattered groups. Napoleon tried to rally his men, but the spell was broken. The Army of the North was finished. Wellington, exhausted and shaken.
Next to a battle lost, the greatest misery is a battle gained.
His own army was mauled, but it had held. Blucher and the Prussians pressed the pursuit relentlessly, determined to prevent Napoleon from rebuilding his army. Within days, Paris fell, and on June 22nd, Napoleon abdicated for the second and final time. The 100 days were over. Europe, scarred but victorious, would never again see the Emperor return.